What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build the best sub $1,500 gaming PC build you can put together right now. With PC hardware prices at rock bottom and GPUs the closest to MSRP they've been in literally years, it's a great time to get gaming with the latest hardware. I'll be running you through all the parts I selected and why, covering off how to put it together and looking at performance numbers a little bit later. Don't go anywhere because this one is a cracker, and without any further ado, let's dive into it. The Cooler Master GM27 FQS comes equipped with a 27-inch Quad HD panel, 165Hz refresh rate, and a customizable ARGB stand. With a super fast IPS panel, you aren't sacrificing image quality for response time, while support for FreeSync Premium and NVIDIA G-Sync make it a great all-rounder. Learn more about this awesome panel at the first link in the description below. And a big thanks to Cooler Master for making this video possible. We're going to kick proceedings off by taking a look at the motherboard and CPU combo for this build. There's a couple of reasons that these are the first parts to focus on. They define basically the rest of the build and the options we have available to us in terms of hardware and the route that we're looking to go when it comes to picking components. The Intel Core i5-12600K is Intel's best i5 ever. Now, I realise I sound like some sort of Silicon Valley presentation, but it really is. It gives performance more akin to a Ryzen 7 or Core i7 than we've ever seen before, with Intel's latest performance and efficiency cores doing a great job when it comes to gaming and multi-threaded workloads. The Intel 12th gen architecture has seen a massive step forward, and frankly kills anything that AMD have currently got right out the water. But watch the space on that one, as things could be about to change. I'll be installing it into this NZXT motherboard. Now, for those of you who haven't heard, NZXT are now quite a decent player in the motherboard market. Collaborating with ASRock on the back end of their designs with BIOS and other features, NZXT have brought their signature design language to the N5 and N7 on the Z690 chipset. One thing they've also done, which is, to be honest with you, a bit of a surprise for a brand like NZXT, is deliver great features at a really affordable price point. This is one of the most entry-level Z690 motherboards around, and while the design looks quite bare bones, you still get all the great features you'd come to expect. With PCIe Generation 5 for your top graphics card, PCIe Gen 4 NVMe slots, and a nice matte black NZXT design with a black PCB, for me it ticks loads of boxes. If we have a look at our rear I/O as well, you'll also find yourself with Wi-Fi 6E, some nice fast USB ports, a 10 gigabit USB-C, and our audio ports. As I say, a more simple motherboard design, but one that's set to save us a nice bit of cash in our build. And if you're looking for more features, why not check out the slightly pricier N7. We'll be coupling our motherboard and CPU up with a 32GB RAM kit from Corsair. This is the Corsair Vengeance RGB RS. Now, this is a nice dual channel kit with 2 RAM DIMMs that's set to provide good performance right now, with dual channel performance, and some nice upgrade paths later for up to 64 gigs down the line. If you do need to save a bit of cash, 16 gigs will technically be okay. 32 is much better though for a higher spec system like the one we'll be putting together in this video. One of the other crucial components of any high-end system nowadays is of course a nice super fast SSD. And if there's one thing that this motherboard doesn't do quite as well as some of its other Z690 counterparts, we've compiled a list, by the way, of the best Z690 motherboards to buy right now, is M.2 cooling, which is where this Corsair MP600 Pro XT comes in. You might be thinking, James, that's an M.2 drive and it's absolutely huge, and you'd be right. This drive is a bit of a chunky boy, however what it does do is provide plenty of cooling for the Gen 4 small NVMe underneath. This is a really crucial add-on, and something that will only cost you another $10, but ensure you keep those nice fast SSD speeds throughout for fast game boot times, fast Windows boot times, and overall no bottlenecking when it comes to your storage and GPU talking to one another. Really nice SSD, great performance numbers, and a full review of it is live over on GeekaWhat.com. Nice one. So the SSD is in, and we can take a look at our cooler. Now, what we can do at this stage is we can take a look at what mounting hardware we can do before moving the motherboard into the case. What fiddly bits of the process essentially we can do now while while the motherboard is out and easy to access, which will save us a pretty difficult and painful job a little bit later on. Now, I've got to give a massive shout out to DeepCool, who sent out this LS520. DeepCool have been really leveling up when it comes to their coolers and their power supplies and all that good stuff recently. I also like their quite eco-friendly brown box packaging with their nice clean accents. I think they've had a rebrand or something along those lines, but they've always been known for making some really high quality but affordable coolers. Check out some of these cool units I used years ago on the channel, back before I even worked with any brands. I was buying these off the internet, used to love them, and they do provide some great performance, great temperature results at a price that won't break the bank. That gives us more money for the GPU, CPU, and components that actually matter to our core FPS gaming experience. By the looks of it, this is actually pretty simple. All we need to do is we need to add on these silver brackets to the bottom of the cooler using the small included screws, a little something like so, and then we're going to pop this included pre-installed plastic bracket through each of the holes on the rear panel of the motherboard. It might be a little bit temperamental, but it should go in. He says, nearly there. Yes, lovely. Now, once that is on, we're going to slide it back onto the motherboard box, and if you locate each of the silver screws now poking through, we're going to add a black stopper onto each of these and a silver screw on the top to stop them going anywhere. We'll be taking the silver screw off in a moment to actually fasten the cooler down, but first we can go ahead and move the motherboard into the case, safe and sound, knowing that our cooler prep is done and that stage of the build will now be significantly easier. This right here is DeepCool's CK560. Now here, this is an interesting case because it's actually got this nice mesh front panel that's disguised as a bit of cheeky RGB. You can see we've got these crosses that provide a really nice aesthetic element, but also are practical in the sense that they allow plenty of fresh airflow through this front dust panel of the case. Now, behind this dust filter, you'll see 3 included 120mm addressable RGB fans, and oh, what is this? A screw from a rogue build of, I don't know, probably a few months ago, but really great cases. The build quality on this feels amazing. Dust filter at the top, dust filter on the bottom, really thick steel panels. The whole thing is just built like a bit of a tank and allows us to install our motherboard nice and easily. All the standoffs today are in the right place, given that the motherboard and the case are the identical form factor. They're both RTX designs, making things that little bit more simpler. Something that can really help in your first build to make the whole thing a little bit less stressful. With the motherboard in, we can then move on to installing the cooler. But before we actually pop the radiator in, it makes sense to add our fans into place first. We're going to pop the radiator at the top. That will not only fill the case out a bit more, but provide exhaust air. This will give us 3 intake and 3 exhaust, allowing us to pull nice cool air through the radiator and simultaneously providing better airflow for the system. It's one of the huge advantages of an all-in-one people often forget about. It gives you extra case fans and extra cooling real estate for the whole system, not just your CPU. Pop those fans onto the radiator, then we're going to install the water block first, as that will be easier without the radiator in place, and pop the radiator on top at the end. We'll be installing the radiator to the top of the case with a few screws like so, and our fans will clamp to the bottom, as we've already sorted out just a few moments ago. Nice and easy, nice and simple. A CPU cooler is always an area where you can be prone to small errors, so consult the manuals, take your time, and if it doesn't look or feel right, it probably isn't. We're then able to move on to the GPU, which is undoubtedly the most important gaming component in any gaming PC build. And that's because, believe it or not, this is the part which actually does all of the gaming. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at our beautiful 3070 Ti, you'll notice I've gone for a derivative from Gigabyte. Now, Gigabyte do some great card designs that work really well as far as performance goes, but also look amazing. If you take a look at this GPU up close and personal, you can see it's got 3 fans on the front here. They're not massive fans, but they definitely keep the card nice and chilly, as you'll see from our temperature performance later. And actually, this segment of the card here is a heatsink extension. What that means is that the PCB, the actual graphics board, ends here, and this is all designed just for the sole purpose of extra cooling capacity. Great for overclocking, GPU clock speeds, and of course temperatures, all of which lead to better performance numbers. One thing that I also like about this graphics card today is that it should do a really good job of filling up our system. The last thing we want is a PC that looks pretty empty because the components plainly aren't big enough to fill enough of the space for it to look logical. If we go ahead and carefully slide the GPU in, pop it into the slot, and it will make a nice satisfying click sound. We also need to add some screws onto the left left here to stop it from bobbing up and down, though this will be aided by an included GPU support bracket. Something DeepCool include that I absolutely love. It's an awesome addition to a case like this and makes a big GPU like this one look really good and stop it from sloping down on one side and ultimately causing damage to your hardware. A really great implementation with a build that's really starting to come together. I'm actually really loving this one so far. Super clean. Once the graphics card is in and looking good, there's only one more component left to go before we can boot the system up, check out the performance, and of course make sure that everything aligns with our expectations. Now this right here is another unit from DeepCool. It's their PM850D. Now to be honest with you, for a build like this, any 750 or 850 watt unit that's 80 plus gold, preferably semi-modular but not a deal breaker, is going to work wow. This unit isn't modular, which is a bit of a shame, a little bit upsetting, but DeepCool do have some modular units available and you will save yourself a nice portion of cash with a unit like this anyway. Despite the fact it isn't modular, you still get these really nice black cables that are individually sleeved and look pretty good and should save us money from having to buy cable extensions for the entirety of the build. With that being said, I am still going to whack some custom ones on the GPU and motherboard. The CPU and all the SATA can stay as is, as they'll be less visible, but those two will add a really nice dynamic to this build. I won't be covering off a full cables and wiring guide today, as it's something we've covered before in great detail, but I'm going to go ahead and get the build wired up before booting it up for the very first time and seeing just how it performs, but first how it looks in the only way we know how. It's time for the all famous GeekaWhat montage. Lovely stuff. The PC's looking great, the build is ready to go, and the performance numbers are in. All of the results we gathered from this system while testing primarily at 1440p and 4K are on your screen now. We've put this PC through its paces with a wide variety of titles, everything from GTA 5 and Battlefield 2042 to Fortnite and Apex Legends. I'll be diving into closer detail one by one, looking at how each of the games performs, and as always, detailed benchmark runs can be found at the link in the description below. First up is Battlefield 2042. At 1080p high settings with DLSS enabled, we pulled in 116 frames per second on average. 90 and 99th percentile results were strong, and we tested here with DLSS enabled. We also tested out Call of Duty's Vanguard with DLSS enabled at 1440p high settings. We pulled in 170 frames per second on average and saw some fantastic results from this system. Smooth gameplay, great frame rates, and an awesome gaming experience. And the good results didn't end there. Forza Horizon 5 next up at 1440p ultra settings. Here we saw just shy of 110 frames per second on average, with 107 to be precise and 192 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. The frame rates were solid and consistent throughout, showing that this is a really good PC for playing those latest AAA titles. And the good results don't end there either. Here in Apex Legends we tested out, we had an amazing game with loads and loads of kills, partly thanks to the awesome frame rates that we achieved at 1440p high settings. We pulled in over 150 frames per second on average, to be precise, 155, with strong 90 and 99th percentiles too. Of course, at 1080p you'd head nearer the 200 frames per second mark, and 4K would drop you down to around 100, giving you some fantastic results in this title. Finally, to wrap things up, we also tested out a little bit of Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings. We achieved here just shy of 250 frames per second this time around, with everything tuned down to low except the render distance, which we set to far, and DLSS, which we of course enabled. And with that, that pretty much wraps it up for not only the benchmarks, but the whole video. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.